You smell it before you understand it. The sharp sting of disinfectant. The sweet sick rot of bodies stacked under sheets. The sour tang of vomit that has seeped into the wooden floors. You are not in a battlefield trench. You are not in a medieval plague pit. You are in a modern hospital. In the heart of 1918. Beds line the wards, row after row, pushed so close together the nurses can barely walk between them. Cots spill into the hallways, the staircases, even the entrance lobbies. Everywhere you look, faces turn blue, lips foaming, chests rattling with the same hopeless sound. Their bodies do not waste away slowly like consumption. They collapse within hours, drowning in the black froth of their own lungs. The world has just emerged from the slaughter of the First World War. 20 million soldiers and civilians are dead, but what you are witnessing now will eclipse even that horror. This new plague will spread faster than any army, cross borders without weapons, and kill in numbers that defy imagination. It will take the strong before the weak, the young before the old. It will kill 50 million souls in a single year. This is not the Middle Ages. This is not the bubonic plague. This is the Spanish flu. And the silence that follows a death here is not peaceful. It is heavy, strained, and unfinished, because another bed has already been filled. You can hear the orderlies dragging away bodies on stretchers, boots thudding against the stone steps. You can hear priests rushing through last rites so quickly the words blur into a chant. You can hear, worst of all, the sound of children coughing in the night, as if waiting their turn. The past is not dead. It is only waiting. Blank. Underscore. Blank. If what you are about to witness unsettles you, or awakens something buried, consider subscribing. Not for the numbers, but to help these forgotten stories rise again. If it brings you value, leave a like. If it lingers with you, leave silence. Blank. Underscore. Blank. It is the spring of 1918. The first whispers of the influenza come not from Spain, but from Kansas, in the heart of the United States. Soldiers at Camp Funston, preparing to embark for the Western Front, fall ill within days. Fevers burn through the barracks. Men cough until they bleed. Doctors call it influenza, but they have never seen influenza like this before. By summer, the newspapers in Spain, one of the few neutral nations free from wartime censorship, report openly on the outbreak. Because the Spanish press can write what British, French, and American papers suppress, the world believes the disease began there. And so the name is born, La Gripe Española, the Spanish flu. But you know the truth. It was never confined to Spain. It was never just another flu. It was a fire carried by armies, ships, and crowded cities, fanned by hunger and fear in the closing months of war. By the autumn of 1918, the second wave arrives, stronger, deadlier. Cities like Philadelphia, Boston, London, and Bombay become graveyards within weeks. Coffins run out. Families bury their dead in potato sacks. In Philadelphia, a parade meant to raise war bonds brings 200,000 people into the streets. Within 3 days, every hospital bed in the city is full. By the end of the week, thousands are dead. The disease does not kill politely. Victims collapse on trams, in church pews, on factory floors. Doctors write of lungs so heavy with fluid they resemble drowned men pulled from rivers. Some patients bleed from the ears and nose. Others turn so dark with cyanosis that nurses struggle to tell the living from the dead. And yet, amid the horror, life continues. Armistice bells ring in November. Soldiers return home with flowers in their rifles. But with influenza in their breath, victory parades turn into funerals. Families who survive the war are obliterated by the flu within weeks. This is where you stand now, in a world that believed it had seen the worst of death. Only to be reminded that nature always has another weapon. The first wave. You are standing on the dust-choked plains of Kansas. The year is 1918. The war in Europe has already consumed millions of lives. But here, in the heart of the United States, another enemy has begun its march. At Camp Funston, part of Fort Riley, nearly 60,000 soldiers are housed in close quarters, training for deployment to the Western Front. Winter has been harsh, and the men are weary. On the morning of March 4th, Private Albert Gitchell, a company cook, reports sick with fever, sore throat, and headache. By noon, more than 100 soldiers follow him into the infirmary. Within a week, the camp is overwhelmed. Over 1,000 men fall ill, their bodies crammed into barracks where open windows do nothing to clear the air. Doctors write of sudden fevers that rise above 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Of men who go from apparently healthy to deathly ill in hours. Their lungs fill, their faces turn dusky blue, their breathing comes in ragged gasps. Yet, remarkably, most survive this early wave. The fatality rate is higher than seasonal influenza, but not yet catastrophic, and so the army moves on. Soldiers recover, others are shipped to Europe, and with them, the influenza sails across the Atlantic. By April, reports of unusual sickness emerge in France. British military hospitals near Étaples record thousands of cases. Some physicians, familiar with the crowded conditions of wartime camps, suspect a strain of influenza has mutated. But with the war raging, few pay attention. What matters is keeping troops fit to fight. Death in the trenches is expected. Death from fever is merely a distraction. You can see it now, the movement of men like veins across a body. Railways pumping soldiers from one camp to another. Steamships packed with regiments crossing oceans. The war is the perfect engine of transmission. In May, cases are reported in Spain. King Alfonso XIII himself falls gravely ill, bedridden with the same fever, cough, and weakness as the common soldier. Unlike the armies of Britain or France, Spain is neutral. Its newspapers are not censored. They report the epidemic openly. Soon the world begins calling it the Spanish flu. Though Spain is no more its origin than any other country, the name will stick, unfairly, forever. In Madrid, theaters close. Workers collapse on trams. In Barcelona, businesses shutter for lack of staff. Yet, even here, most recover. Deaths are alarming, but not overwhelming. It is still, at this stage, an influenza with teeth, but not yet a scythe. The danger lies hidden in its spread, not its lethality. By June, the disease has touched Britain, Italy, and Germany. In London, The Times reports thousands absent from work, postal services interrupted, and hospitals filling with patients. Still, the mortality remains moderate. Doctors comfort themselves that this is only influenza, a bad year. But not unprecedented. But you, standing within those wards, can already sense something else. The victims are not just the elderly and infirm. As with most influenzas, they are strong young adults, soldiers in their 20s, factory workers in their 30s, mothers in their prime. Their immune systems, so vigorous, respond with violent overdrive, flooding their lungs with fluid until they suffocate. It is a cruel paradox. The healthier you are, the faster you die. Summer passes. Troop movements intensify. The German spring offensive is underway, and Allied counterattacks push men across battlefields in waves. The influenza goes with them, threading through foxholes, dugouts, and field hospitals. Yet the war overshadows all. Commanders speak of divisions lost to shells and bullets, not fevers. Politicians issue speeches on victory, not illness. In India, reports begin to surface by late summer of a mysterious fever spreading through Bombay. Ships carrying soldiers and workers carry the virus into crowded ports, where conditions are ripe for contagion. Tens of thousands fall sick. Yet again, the numbers of deaths seem manageable. No one suspects what is coming. By September, the first wave appears to recede. Across Europe, the United States, and Asia. Communities breathe a sigh of relief. Deaths diminish. People return to work. Schools reopen. Life resumes. Fragile but steady. But influenza is not finished. It is not fading. It is mutating. And the next time it comes, it will come like a storm. You can almost hear it now. The silence before the second wave. Streets buzzing again. Parades held. Families gathering in optimism. The soldiers who survived the trenches believe they have seen the worst the world has to offer. They are wrong. For what will erupt in the autumn of 1918 will not be influenza as the world has known it. It will be something else entirely. A sickness so swift and lethal that doctors will describe patients struck down in the morning and dead by night. A plague that will turn entire cities into morgues. A pandemic that will kill more people in a single year than the Black Death did in a century. The first wave has passed, but the true face of the Spanish flu is only beginning to reveal itself. The second wave. You are standing in Boston Harbor in late August 1918. The war in Europe is drawing to a bloody close. But here, a different enemy is preparing its assault. A naval ship, the SS Parthia, has arrived from Europe. Among its crew are men coughing, feverish, their lungs rattling. Within days, the infection spreads into the city. By the first week of September, Boston General Hospital reports dozens of cases. By the second week, it is hundreds. Within a month, the city is drowning in death. Doctors quickly realize this is not the influenza they thought they had survived in spring. This is something far more lethal. Patients complain of dizziness and body aches. Within hours, their condition collapses. They cough up thick, bloody froth. Their skin turns the color of bruised plums. And many die gasping for air. Some corpses are so dark with cyanosis that nurses describe them as looking more black than white. The hospitals overflow. Even the great Harvard medical institutions have no answers. From Boston, the fire spreads south and west. Army camps along the eastern seaboard, filled with young recruits preparing to ship to France, become incubators. At Camp Devens, outside the city, 12,000 men fall ill within weeks. In a single day, hundreds are carried into overflowing wards. A doctor stationed there writes, "It is only a matter of a few hours until death comes. It is horrible. One can stand it to see 1, 2, or 20 men die, but to see these poor devils dropping like flies." His words, recorded in letters, are desperate, almost broken. By late September, the contagion reaches Philadelphia. City officials know the illness is spreading but refuse to cancel the Liberty Loan Parade scheduled for September 28. 200,000 people crowd the streets, waving flags, cheering soldiers, unaware that invisible death moves among them. Within 72 hours, every hospital bed in Philadelphia is full. Within a week, 4,000 are dead. By the end of October, 12,000 corpses fill the city. Coffins run out. Gravediggers cannot keep pace. Bodies pile in homes, stacked in corners, left on porches. The smell carries across entire neighborhoods. This is the second wave, and it is everywhere, from New York to Chicago, from London to Paris, from Bombay to Cape Town. The influenza tears through cities with a speed unmatched in human memory. Trains become hearses. Schools close indefinitely. Entire villages vanish from maps. In the trenches of France, soldiers who survived mustard gas now fall to the flu. Military reports record entire companies struck down. Commanders worry less about enemy offensives than the disease that disables their armies. Yet, silence continues in censored newspapers. They speak of fevers, of respiratory troubles, but not of the scale of death. Only in neutral Spain are the headlines honest. And so the world still calls it the Spanish flu. The horror is not only the numbers. It is the manner of death. Autopsies reveal lungs so heavy with fluid they nearly sink in water. Doctors describe them as resembling red, waterlogged sponges. Some victims bleed not just from the mouth, but from the nose, ears, even the eyes. Others die within 12 hours of first symptoms, collapsing in streets, churches, and factories. Nurses, mostly young women, fight desperately to tend the sick. Many die themselves. In some hospitals, more staff are dead than patients. Priests cannot keep up with last rites. In Ireland, bodies are stacked in churches awaiting burial, candles burning day and night. In India, funeral pyres blaze along the Ganges, consuming the dead in endless succession. In Alaska, entire Inuit communities are wiped out, their homes left silent but for the wind. The second wave is merciless. It strikes at the healthy, strong men and women in their 20s and 30s, the backbone of families. The workforce of nations fall first. Children are orphaned by the tens of thousands. In cities, horse-drawn carts rumble through the streets each morning, calling for the dead to be brought out. Families hesitate to open their doors, afraid their neighbors will see how many corpses lie inside. In Philadelphia, so many die so quickly that the Catholic Church orders seminaries emptied to make room for bodies. Ice rinks and warehouses are converted into morgues. Officials pled with citizens to dig graves for strangers, for the city has no hands left to bury its own. The smell, witnesses say, is unforgettable, sweet, cloying, heavy. It drifts from houses, from makeshift morgues, from the piles of coffins left in sunlit streets. Even masks soaked in carbolic acid cannot keep it away. You walk through the city and the stench follows you like a second skin. And yet, life continues. Grimly, in November, the armistice is signed. Bells ring across Europe and America. Crowds gather to celebrate peace. But in the photographs of those parades, you notice something haunting. Many faces are hidden behind gauze masks. The war is over, but the true enemy is still alive. Soldiers returning home bring not just medals, but infection. Victory parades become superspreading events. Silent funerals in disguise. By December, the second wave reaches its zenith. Global deaths climb by the millions. Estimates suggest that in some cities, 1 out of every 3 inhabitants falls ill. Entire communities are hollowed out, and there is no cure. Doctors prescribe whiskey, aspirin, even bleeding. None of it helps. Families turn to home remedies, mustard poultices, garlic necklaces, prayers whispered over beds, but nothing stops the suffocation. Nothing halts the fever. When the second wave finally begins to ebb in early 1919, the world is altered. 50 million are gone. Some say more. Perhaps as many as 100 million. The true number is unknowable. Buried in mass graves. Lost in villages that ceased to exist. But the memory lingers. The doctor's notes. The newspapers that dared to print the truth. The photographs of endless hospital rows and streets filled with carts of the dead. And you, standing here, now, are left with the echoes. The rattling breaths. The smell of lungs drowning in their own blood. The silence of houses where entire families perished. This is the legacy of the second wave. A reminder that even in the age of machines, even in the age of science, the old reaper still waits at the edge of every breath. The second wave has shown its face. But influenza is not finished. The world must endure a third strike. Less lethal but still cruel. Before it can finally breathe again. The third wave and aftermath. You are standing in the frozen winter of January 1919. Across the world, families believe the nightmare has ended. The great wave of death that swept through in autumn has retreated. Streets are no longer lined with coffins. Church bells ring less often. The smell of decay has finally lifted. But you know better. Influenza is not done. It has changed, adapted, and it is waiting to strike again. The third wave begins quietly. Reports emerge from Australia, which had largely escaped the devastation of 1918 by enforcing strict quarantines. But now, ships carry the virus to Sydney and Melbourne. Within weeks, Thousands are sick. Officials scramble to impose mask mandates and close public spaces. In Sydney, police patrol the streets, fining those who refuse to cover their faces. Still, the virus spreads. By March, the death toll has reached tens of thousands. In Europe, weary populations stagger under the renewed blow. Paris sees hospitals once more filled with gasping patients. In London, doctors record entire families struck down in a matter of days. In Glasgow, mortality rates spike, and once again gravediggers work through the night. Yet, this wave is not as explosive as the second. It kills, yes, mercilessly, but it no longer burns entire cities into silence. Instead, it lingers, dragging on month after month, a slow grinding of life into death. In America, the influenza resurges in Chicago, New York, and San Francisco. School closures return, theaters shut their doors, public anger grows. People demand to know why authorities declared the danger over, only for it to return. In San Francisco, anti-mask leagues form, protesting ordinances that require face coverings. Tensions rise between those who see masks as salvation and those who see them as tyranny. The influenza does not care. It continues its work. In India, the suffering is catastrophic. The famine and poverty left by the war make populations especially vulnerable. In Bombay, the funeral pyres burn without pause. Estimates suggest that as many as 12 to 17 million Indians die across the waves of the pandemic, one of the greatest losses in a single nation's history. Villages are abandoned, their fields untended, their children orphaned. The British colonial government records the numbers in cold statistics. But you, standing among the ashes, can see the true scale, entire generations erased. In Persia, mortality rates climb so high that foreign diplomats describe cities where a quarter of the population has vanished. In Africa, colonial soldiers returning from Europe carry the virus deep into villages. Records from Sierra Leone and South Africa describe communities devastated, chiefs buried with their people, and traditions broken by the sheer scale of death. Even in the Arctic, Inuit settlements are annihilated. In some, not a single soul remains alive. Dogs are found gnawing at the frozen remains of their masters. Missionaries arriving months later record scenes of absolute silence, houses filled with corpses. Food untouched, fires long extinguished, and yet, the influenza moves with uneven cruelty. Some places are spared almost entirely. Whether through isolation, luck, or chance, islands like American Samoa impose strict quarantines and escape with no recorded deaths. Just across the ocean, Western Samoa loses over 20% of its population. A gulf of fate, determined not by medicine but by policy, by a few decisions made in haste. By the middle of 1919, the third wave begins to ebb. The war has ended, soldiers return home, nations try to rebuild, but the pandemic leaves scars deeper than trenches. Doctors have no explanation for why it came, why it killed so many, why it targeted the young. Families carry grief that cannot be measured in numbers. Cemeteries overflow. In some towns, entire surnames vanish from the record. Whole family lines extinguished. You walk through these landscapes of absence and see how societies attempt to cope. In New York, mass graves are dug in Potter's Field. In London, headstones bear the same year again and again, 1918, 1919, 1919, 1918, etched in endless repetition. In villages across France, the dead of war are listed on monuments. But the influenza dead are not. They are remembered only in silence. In the gaps at dinner tables. In the photographs of faces that never aged. The influenza recedes by 1920. There will be no fourth wave. Slowly, life resumes. Weddings are held again. Schools reopen. Churches sing hymns not only for the fallen soldiers but for the unseen victims of the pandemic. Yet, the memory remains raw, Survivors speak of it in hushed tones, as if the very word, influenza, could summon it back. Scientists struggle to understand what happened. The virus itself remains invisible. The influenza virus will not even be identified until the 1930s. Long after the graves have filled. In 1918, doctors spoke of miasmas, of germs, of causes they could not see. They wore masks of gauze. They doused wards in carbolic acid, but they never truly understood the enemy they faced. And so the pandemic drifts into history. It is overshadowed by the war, forgotten in official memorials, absent from victory parades. Yet, for those who lived through it, it is unforgettable. They remember the smell of overcrowded wards, the sight of loved ones turning blue in hours, the silence of houses with curtains drawn, never to open again. Some call it the greatest disaster in human history. In terms of deaths, it surpasses even the Black Death. 50 million souls, perhaps more. The true toll will never be known. For many, it does not matter. What matters is the emptiness it left behind, the children who grew up without parents, the parents who buried all their children, the societies forever altered by absence. You stand now at the close of this terrible story. The third wave is gone. The world breathes again, but it is not the same world. It has learned that even in the modern age, with steel ships, telegraphs, and medicine, humanity is still fragile, still at the mercy of forces it cannot see, still vulnerable to the breath of another human being. This is the aftermath of the Spanish flu, a silence deeper than war. A scar that runs through every continent, a lesson that time tries to bury but never fully erases. You are standing in the 1920s, in a world that is rebuilding. The war has ended, the influenza has receded, streets once lined with coffins now ring with music, with laughter, with the promise of prosperity. It is the beginning of the Roaring Twenties, an age of jazz, cinema, and modernity. Yet beneath the surface, there lingers a silence that speaks of 50 million dead, of homes emptied, of voices never heard again. The Spanish flu left scars deeper than its statistics. Yet, strangely, history did not carve its memory in stone. War memorials rise in every village of Europe, inscribed with the names of soldiers lost. But where are the monuments to the influenza dead? Where are the statues for the children, the mothers, the laborers who suffocated in their homes? The answer lies in the way societies chose to remember, or to forget. Part of this forgetting was exhaustion. After 4 years of mechanized slaughter, humanity longed for stories of valor, of sacrifice, of victory. Death by war could be given meaning. Death by disease could not. Soldiers died as heroes. Influenza victims died as shadows. To remember them was to reopen wounds too vast to bear. In families, memory survived quietly. A photograph left on a mantelpiece. A story whispered about the child who died in the epidemic. In some places, entire genealogies collapsed. Survivors carried the silence forward, unwilling or unable to speak. The pandemic was buried not only in graves but in minds. Yet traces remain. In archives, you can read the letters of doctors, written in tones of despair. In newspapers, you can find the hurried obituaries that filled entire columns in 1918. In government reports, you can see the numbers, so many numbers, that fail to capture the human weight behind them. But outside these records, the Spanish flu vanished from the collective imagination faster than any catastrophe of its size. In America, writers like Catherine Ann Porter captured fragments of the horror. In her novella Pale Horse, Pale Rider, she describes fever, delirium, and the nearness of death as she herself nearly succumbed. Yet few such works gained lasting attention. Literature embraced war, not plague. Film celebrated soldiers, not patients gasping in hospital beds. The forgetting had consequences. When new epidemics arose, The Asian flu of 1957. The Hong Kong flu of 1968. Few looked back to 1918 for lessons. The Spanish flu remained a ghost, its warnings muffled by silence. Only when HIV emerged in the late 20th century, and when COVID-19 erupted in the 21st, did the world truly recall what influenza had done. Scientists returned to the graves, exhumed frozen corpses in Alaska, and finally sequenced the virus that had eluded doctors for so long. The memory lives, too, in the survivors' stories. Imagine the orphaned children who grew old but never forgot the smell of lime sprinkled over bodies. Imagine the nurses who recalled entire wards falling silent in a single night. Imagine the gravediggers who never spoke of their work but carried its weight in their eyes. They were witnesses, like you, and their silence was its own kind of testimony. The legacy of the Spanish flu is not only in the lives it ended but in the way it shaped the century that followed. Public health began to change. Governments created ministries of health, funded research, and debated the importance of quarantine and masks. The League of Nations, precursor to the United Nations, established health offices to monitor disease internationally. It was a first step toward recognizing that sickness ignores borders, that humanity is bound together by invisible threads of breath. And yet, the lesson was never fully learned. Even a century later, when a new pandemic swept the world, many of the same debates returned, about masks, about freedom, about the balance between economy and life. The same silences appeared: how to mourn, how to count, how to remember the dead. The Spanish flu is not only a story of death, it is a story of how easily societies choose to forget what they cannot explain. You stand now in a cemetery. The headstones around you bear no mention of influenza. Yet the dates reveal the truth. 1918, 1919, 1919 again. Entire families ended within weeks. Some graves are unmarked, mass pits dug when coffins ran out. A child's toy lies half buried in the soil. A name scratched into wood has long since faded. These are the true memorials, not statues or arches, but absences. The pandemic also left echoes in science. Researchers studied why young adults died so swiftly, why the virus seemed to burn through lungs with such violence. Some spoke of cytokine storms, immune systems attacking themselves. Others examined the global conditions: war, malnutrition, overcrowding, that gave the virus such power. Answers remain incomplete. Even now, the Spanish flu is not fully understood. But one truth endures: the fragility of human life. In the space of a year, tens of millions vanished, entire nations trembled, and yet, within a decade, the world danced, drank, and forgot. This paradox is the Spanish flu's most haunting legacy, not only how many it killed, but how swiftly it disappeared from memory. You, standing here, are asked to remember, to smell again the wards filled with carbolic acid and death, to hear the coughs of soldiers in Kansas barracks, to see the parades that turned into funerals, to walk through the silent houses where curtains never opened, to remember, because so many did not. The Spanish flu was not only a pandemic, it was a mirror held up to humanity, showing our strength, our fragility, our denial, and our capacity for forgetting. It is a story of death, yes, but also a story of silence. And silence, too, is part of history. You are standing at the edge of memory. The year is no longer 1918. The wards have emptied. The coffins are buried. The parades have faded into photographs. But the echoes remain. The Spanish flu killed more human beings in a single year than 4 years of the First World War. Its reach was total, stretching from the trenches of France to the villages of India, from the frozen huts of Alaska to the crowded streets of Cape Town. No continent was spared, no family was untouched. 50 million lives, perhaps more, ended in silence, without ceremony, without monuments. And yet, What is most haunting is not only the death toll, but the forgetting. The Spanish flu slipped from public memory, hidden behind the noise of war, buried beneath the joy of peace. Soldiers were mourned as heroes. Influenza victims were mourned only in private. Their graves were unmarked, their stories untold. But you remember. You have walked through the hospital wards. You have seen the priests rushing to give last rites, their words blurred by the sheer number of the dying. You have smelled the cloying odor of bodies piled in morgues. You have heard the silence of homes where every chair is empty, every bed unfilled. You have stood in the streets where carts rumbled past, calling for the dead to be brought out. You have watched entire communities erased in days. And remembering matters, because the story of the Spanish flu is not just about the past, it is about what always waits in the future. It is about how quickly humanity forgets, how easily it believes itself safe, how fragile life is when faced with the smallest of enemies, a breath, a cough, a touch. It is about how nations can ignore warnings, how parades can become funerals, how silence can erase even the greatest tragedy. Perhaps this is the most human truth of all, that we bury not only our dead, but also our memories of them. Yet memory is the only defense against repeating the same mistakes. The Spanish flu taught the world that pandemics are not relics of the Middle Ages. They are not bound to plague pits or quarantined ships. They are timeless, and they return when vigilance fades. As you stand now, looking back across a century, you carry their story. You carry the voices of the doctors who wrote desperate letters, the nurses who died among their patients, the families who left toys on graves and names scratched on wood. You carry the silence of 50 million. And that silence is not empty. It is a warning. It is a reminder. It is a weight that should never be lifted. The Spanish flu is gone, but its lesson endures. The past is not dead. It is only waiting.